What's up, guys? It's Eric. I'm the knife guru that 585 Outdoors borrows every now and then. So today I'm going to actually be talking about knife sharpening. Now, a lot of people, that it's not as sexy and as exciting as talking about, you know, the knives and the gear itself and what kind of knives everyone uses and what kind of steels and whatnot. But sharpening is a very important part of knife maintenance. Now, you can obviously very easily have someone else sharpen your knives, or you can send your knives back to the manufacturer to be sharpened. But I personally prefer sharpening myself. I prefer freehand sharpening, but there are plenty of, good ways to do it. What we're going to be talking about today is freehand sharpening using a progression of diamond stones, a finishing stone, and then a series of strops. Now, this is a very nerdy way to do freehand sharpening, and I'm going to talk about some ways you can simplify it to save a little bit of time and money. But my method is basically getting a perfectly polished, mirrored type of edge on whatever knife that you're doing. Now, as far as what angle per side you're using, a lot of knife kits, there's the Edge Pro Apex, there's the Wicked Edge. Those will actually have guided rods, and those will allow you to set the angle per side of your edge, which those are great systems. And if you want to spend a good bit of money but have a system that you can't mess up unless you clamp the knife wrong or something, go ahead and check those out. What I'm using today is a series of stones from DMT, then a finishing stone from Spyderco, and then I actually have these leather strops from Chef Knives To Go. These are backed with a magnet strip, and I actually have these loaded with diamond compounds from Chef Knives To Go. I don't forget, they say Hand American on there. That's the brand name. If you want to Google that, or just go to Chef Knives To Go. That's where I get my stuff. They're not paying me for this, unfortunately. I just like their product and I pay out of pocket for it. I'm using 3-micron diamond paste, and now paste versus sprays here. Paste is, I think, honestly just as good as spray, and I think spray is just as good as paste. I think it just depends on what you find easier to apply. Paste, you can spread it around and get a thicker coating a little more easily, but spray is really quick. Just spray it in a couple places on there and then let it dry out. And that's the thing, let the pastes or sprays, whatever you're using on your strops, dry. Now, the knife that we're going to be sharpening today is a Benchmade Steep Country. This is a hunting knife. This was actually used by Ian for his hunting season. And the edge is not horrific overall, but it's definitely very chipped in some spots. And obviously this is a problem because a chipped edge is not a continuous smooth edge, and it's not going to cut as well. And it is also definitely very dull. This knife saw a lot of use this year, I can tell, and I can really feel the spots where it's damaged. The angle is also relatively obtuse, so I'm going to be reprofiling this edge as we sharpen. Reprofiling refers to the act of taking a knife's edge as it came from the factory, or maybe as you did it previously, or any number of things, and what you're doing is you're changing the angle of the edge. I'm going to bring this one to be significantly less, technically it's still an acute angle, but I call it obtuse when it's this much. This looks like a 45 degree edge almost. This is, at least 20 to 25 degrees per side. I'm going to try to bring this a little closer to 10 to 15. I think that'll be a little bit more useful. So, this is also S30V steel. The type of steel that you're sharpening is something important to keep in mind. If you're buying a sharpening system and you don't have one yet, you want to make sure you buy a sharpening system with stones that will effectively and quickly cut whatever steel that you are sharpening. This is S30V. S30V is a relatively hard steel, but it's not as hard as something like S110V or M390. There's all kinds of different steels out there, and what you're looking for when you're shopping is, generally speaking, you can find the Rockwell hardness or HRC of any steel that you are buying if you're buying a knife. If you don't see the HRC listed on the product page for your knife, then you could probably sharpen the thing on a wood table because it's probably just a cheapo steel. That's an exaggeration, but point still stands. You could probably get away with like an Arkansas stone, Japanese whetstones. Those are very good for either really thin knives or very soft steel. I recommend diamond stones for flexibility because nothing is ever too hard for sharpening a certain steel, but it can be a little bit not hard enough and not abrasive enough. So I'm gonna bring the camera back in actually so you can see my hands and my workspace as I'm doing this, and we're going to start on the DMT extra coarse stone, and I'm gonna use this extra coarse diamond stone to basically totally rebuild this edge. Okay, so I brought the camera back in and we have the DMT extra coarse stone. You may notice that this is a little bit small for the Duo Sharp bench platform that I have, but because it is a DMT product still, there is a cutout here so I can brace that in there with minimal movement, and the rubber feet on this stone holder are actually very good for keeping the stone in place while you're sharpening. Any other bench stone system that you prefer or that you like or that you get, I recommend having something with, some kind of rubber feet on it, or maybe putting down a mouse pad or something. You want a base where your stone isn't really going to move on you, because you don't want the stone to be moving, you want the knife to be moving on the stone. So with this knife, for reprofiling it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to kind of feel out the angle I want by just, and a lot of this is practice. When it comes to sharpening freehand, this is why a lot of people prefer guided systems, and I'm not going to hate on those at all. Those are great systems. I just like freehand because I think it's fun, which is a totally valid reason to do things, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to feel out the angle a little bit, and I want to see some material being taken off toward the back of the edge and not quite on the very apex of the edge itself. So let me see if I can get a little bit of footage of what that looks like. Now, when I'm sharpening, what I typically do is I will drag from the heel of the blade. This blade is a nice sharpening choil, which makes things very easy. And I will drag from the heel of the blade to the tip and try to follow the contour of the edge on the stone. And you want to do this as best as you can, keeping the angle as consistent as you can so that you don't end up with an edge that's wavy or inconsistent from heel to toe. Or well, not heel to toe, heel to tip. You also want to be mindful of the amount of pressure that you're putting on your knife while you're actually sharpening it, because too much pressure can drag your stone with it, and that's just going to cause a messy looking edge. Not enough pressure, and you're not going to sharpen. So these are all kind of things you have to feel out with practice. So you can't see it on camera, but I can see it from my naked eye that I am actually starting to expand the area that looks like it's been ground away at the very edge, and that's what you want. You want to look like that's coming up a little bit if you're reprofiling. If you are not reprofiling and you are trying to match the angle that you already have, you don't want to see that happening, and you want to be very careful when you're sharpening and try to really feel like you're laying the knife flat, and then feel like you're laying it flat and finding that point where the apex of the edge is just against the stone, and that you actually are able to do the proper stroke, and you are sharpening that apex and that entire length of that edge, and that right there looks like pretty much a perfect stroke of that. So that just takes practice. Buy some cheap knives and practice sharpening on your cheap knives before you step up to more expensive knives that you care about more. A lot of this does come down to just practice, practice, practice. So I'm gonna finish on the extra course and take this all the way through all the grits, and I will show you how that goes. Okay, so now I have officially gotten it to the point where the angle on this side and the size of the bevel roughly matches the other side that I did previously. Now, when you are sharpening like this, what you want to do is you actually want to get it so you raise a burr on either side, get them to roughly match. You look at your tip, see that either side of the tip roughly matches, and then you want to just do a couple of very, very light strokes almost on the corner of the stone to knock that burr off. And that is called deburring. So obviously that refers to knocking the burr that you've raised off of the edge. And you can do this at various points with any of the stones, but you want to do that because you want to actually see what your edge looks like when you've actually knocked the burr off of it. So I'm actually seeing here that I haven't totally repaired that chip near the tip. So this is where you get into your little bit of a dilemma. When you're sharpening a damaged edge, you can either continue removing material on the coarse stones until you've totally repaired it and the edge looks totally good, or you can continue sharpening and just hope that in subsequent sharpenings, any little chips or anything come out. Either way is totally valid. Technically, you get a nicer edge if you get all the chips out in sharpening, but you can still get a perfectly functional edge even if it is a little bit chipped but really sharpened around it. I am probably actually going to continue sharpening this on the extra coarse just so that I can totally get that chip knocked out. A good trick that you can use when you're trying to learn freehand sharpening is you can actually take a Sharpie and you can run that just along your edge, color in that bevel, and just make sure you're only coloring the bevel, you know, stay in the lines. You should have learned that in grade school or kindergarten, really, depends on how advanced you were. And what you do is you just color that bevel. You can always remove any excess if you do miss with like alcohol or something later. And now that you've got that bevel colored, that is gonna wear away as you sharpen that bevel. So lay it on here, take a couple of strokes, and this will let you know whether or not your angle is any good. And as we can see here, the Sharpie is pretty much totally worn away near the tip, but it's actually not that worn away near the heel of the blade. So I need to correct my technique just a little bit. Sharpie lets me know that, and I can actually focus on that area. And now the Sharpie is pretty much totally gone. So as you wear away that Sharpie, you know where your angle is, and that can help you find your edge angle. So the Sharpie trick is a really good trick for when you're freehand sharpening, and I mean in general, or especially when you're trying to learn. Okay, so we've got the knife reprofiled and pretty much totally repaired on the extra coarse stone. Now with this stone, you don't get exactly a, you don't get a very finished edge. It's very, very coarse. It's got a lot of scratches and striations on it. Now it'll, you know, pull off fingernail if you're doing that kind of sharpening test, like if you ever sharpen skis. So it's that kind of sharp, and it's like kind of finger grabby sharp. It'll probably cut something, but it's a very grabby, very toothy edge, and it's not exactly finished by most people's edge standards. So that's why we have other grits. Now, what grits you need for sharpening are going to depend on what you're trying to do for sharpening. If you have a truly damaged edge or you want your knife reprofiled, a lot of people will recommend sending it out, and a lot of other people will say, no, just get the kit and do it yourself. It all depends on what you're comfortable doing and what you want to learn. But as far as grit progression for sharpening goes, assuming you do want to do it all yourself, this is the extra coarse DMT stone. This is now the coarse DMT stone. We can put the grits, you know, in the description. We'll have links to these so that you can buy them yourself if you want. And what you're doing is you're trying to go from the coarser grit all the way up to as fine a grit as possible. And doing that gets you from, hey, this is your heavy cutting grit. This really gets your edge repaired and reprofiled and cuts a lot of steel. And then you just keep polishing and refining that edge as much as possible. So now we are going to do the coarse stone, and then we're going to do the fine stone that's on the other side of this. Then we're going to do the extra fine, then the extra extra fine, and then the Spyderco ultra fine ceramic finishing stone, and then we're going to take it through a series of strops, and that'll hopefully give us a mirrored edge that can either shave or literally whittle hairs. We'll see, because this edge isn't exactly super thin, doesn't have quite the razor geometry, but we'll see what we can do. Okay, so at this point I have finished on all the diamond stones, and now I am going to use the Spyderco ultra fine ceramic stone. I use this as a finishing stone because I've already kind of started out, but you can see here, this is what I got from the extra extra fine DMT stone. This is what I've got from just a few strokes on the Spyderco ultra fine. It's a very, very polished edge when you go through the whole grit progression like this. And it's gonna lead to some really good results. And it should be a pretty durable edge as well, because once you've got a really nicely polished edge that comes to a really steep apex, even as it gets used and worn down and chips a little bit, it should still be able to cut very effectively. So let's continue on with the polishing here. Now, I do polishing of the edge pretty much the same way I do sharpening of the edge, and that's just, you know, with a series of strokes, but you're really kind of, at this point, sanding the edge with a pretty smooth ceramic. So you just need to be a little patient, take your time, and go until you see a consistent level of polish across the entire edge. And yeah, I mean, that right there looks pretty darn good. You can also, you know, just go a little bit on here if you're doing diamond strops like this, because the diamond compound will do a lot of polishing as well, but I like to do at least a little bit of a base layer of some good finish on here. So I'm gonna keep on doing that. At this point, you're not cutting the steel and wearing away as much material, so, I mean, really, as long as you don't mess up your angle drastically at this point, you're probably not going to hurt your edge too much, but you should definitely be careful because you don't want to knock off that good apex that you just spent all those diamond stones developing. Realistically, too, like I said, you probably could have stopped this entire process at the fine stone and just gone directly to a strop. As far as stropping goes, you can use just a leather belt or a classic strop loaded with some of the green compound that almost looks like a crayon. Any of those will work and you will get a pretty good edge out of that. This is just an extra level of polish for those of you who are super committed. So at this point, we've got this edge pretty well polished and it definitely feels pretty sharp. Again, if I do the shave test, it is easily shaving. So again, you could stop here. You could not do the stropping. You could not continue with this. Most people will consider that a more than adequate edge. It is shaving sharp. You could absolutely use this. I, however, am a glutton for punishment and I like doing the extra step. So we're gonna put away the Spyderco stone and we're going to take out our 3 micron loaded leather strop because I want to talk about stropping. So the way these strops work is you take them and they have a magnetic back, put them on a steel surface, in this case my stone, and I recommend wiping off the blade before you start stropping. You don't want to carry any excess steel unnecessarily onto the strop. You don't want to carry any, you know, coarse material from your stones. What you want is you want the compound on the strop to do the work. Stropping, I personally recommend going from heel to tip, just like that, and being very careful not to drag your tip too much along the strop, because that is how you get little cuts in your strop and it wears down your strop more quickly and then you have to replace it more frequently. So with stropping, I usually do about 10 strokes per side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There you go. You can see I passed very basic math when I was in literal kindergarten, actually preschool probably. Then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And at this point, you really are putting very, very little pressure on the blade. You just want to barely drag your bevel along there. And you just want that to, again, do the polishing work. Now, if there's compound that comes off your strop and gets stuck to your edge, that's no bother. Just wipe it off as you go. Unfortunately, that is a downside of the paste, I find. The paste does kind of like to follow your edge off. But once you get that wiped off, I actually recommend keeping some gun oil around to make that a bit easier. So with this gun oil loaded onto just a paper towel, that helps you cut off any compound that's following your edge off. And you can see the level of polish that you're getting. Now definitely wipe that oil off. You don't want to load your leather with that too much. And continue going. Okay, so just finished on the 3 micron strop here. I'm pretty satisfied with the result I've gotten from this. This knife is definitely very sharp at this point. Again, if we do the shave test, it is very easily shaving arm hair, and that is a pretty darn good edge. I am actually going to stop here for this video just because my camera battery is about to die, but it's the same process with these different levels of micron. What you get with these microns is that you go down to different levels of grit with the diamond compound. But if you get to a really polished edge that shaves like this, you're probably pretty satisfied. Most people are probably pretty satisfied with that. 3 micron is a great way to finish. A rough equivalent would probably be something like the white compound that you often get with a lot of strop sets. So the green compound is also a really good finishing compound. You go down to something like 1/4 micron, and that's the equivalent of stropping your edge on 100,000 grit sandpaper. So at that point, the leather is more abrasive than the diamond, but the diamond is harder, so it's still doing the work of polishing. Those are really more meant for like sushi knives, but I own them because I'm a tryhard like that. But with this kind of edge, you really do have a very nicely polished, very well finished edge, and this will definitely cut for a long, long time, and you can usually maintain edges that aren't chipped out just with stropping. Then if your edge is only lightly damaged, use something like the fine stone or even the finishing stone for touch-ups, and only use the coarse stones for reprofiling or serious edge repair. So hopefully you found this helpful in your own freehand sharpening adventures. Our edge actually came out a little bit, pretty much symmetrical. Maybe a touch asymmetrical, but that's to be expected, though the tip looks pretty good. And that is our edge on this bench blade now. Hopefully it'll serve Ian pretty well. So I've been Eric from 585 Outdoors. Hopefully you found this guide helpful, and hopefully Ian enjoys the fancy edge on his new knife. So thanks for watching, guys.